All right, let's jump right into Deuteronomy 18. Now, I want you to think of this not as some dusty old scroll, but more like a spiritual constitution. It was written for a nation right on the brink of entering a new land, a land that was, let's just say, filled with all kinds of foreign spiritual practices.
Right from the get-go, the stakes are incredibly high. The whole chapter really boils down to this one fundamental choice. We're not just talking about a list of rules here, we're talking about two completely different ways of navigating the world, of dealing with all the stuff you don't know. Were they going to try to control the supernatural themselves, or were they going to trust God to reveal what they needed to know?
So what were the options on the table? Well, on one side, you've got what all the surrounding cultures were doing. The Canaanites had this whole toolkit of magic, sorcery, divination, all things designed for people to try and manipulate spiritual forces to get what they want. But on the other side, God sets up this official system for Israel. It includes the written law, a priesthood to teach that law, and prophets to speak directly for him. This chapter is all about drawing a really thick line in the sand between these two worldviews.
To really get why God's system was set up the way it was, we've got to first understand the problem it was trying to solve. You know, that human desire to know the future, to have some control over events, to connect with the divine, that's universal. It was true then, and it's true now. But, as we're about to see, that desire often led people down some very dark and forbidden paths.
And this isn't some vague warning. No, it's a definitive blacklist. The text lays it all out, prohibiting everything from the absolute horror of child sacrifice to things like divination, looking for omens in the sky, and even necromancy, trying to consult the dead for answers. This list makes it crystal clear what was considered completely out of bounds.
So why such a hard line? Why were these things banned so forcefully? Well, the text uses this incredibly powerful Hebrew word, to'eva. We translate it as abomination, but that barely scratches the surface. This isn't just about something being wrong or breaking a rule. A to'eva is something that's deeply, spiritually disgusting. It's an action that fundamentally clashes with the very nature of God. So trying to manipulate spirits wasn't just a mistake, it was seen as this profound betrayal of trust in the one who had promised to guide them.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? God actually provides a two-part answer. And the first part is a stable, reliable institution, the priesthood. This wasn't just about ceremonies and rituals. It was about creating a whole class of people dedicated to teaching and grounding the entire nation in their relationship with God.
And this right here just shows you how radically different the priests were meant to be. See, in the ancient world, your land, your nahala, was everything. It was your security, your identity, your future. Every single tribe in Israel got a piece of land, except for one, the priestly tribe, the Levites. Their inheritance was something else entirely. Their inheritance was God himself.
Just let that sink in for a second. The Lord is their inheritance. I mean, what a radical idea. By not giving them land, the system was designed to prevent the religious leadership from piling up worldly wealth and political power. Their focus had to stay spiritual. They were meant to be dependent not on property but entirely on God.
So, how did they survive? Well, they were supported by what you could basically call a faith economy. It worked like this. The people bring their offerings and tithes to God. God then, in turn, allocates a portion of those offerings to take care of his priests. And here's the crucial part. The well-being of the priests was directly tied to the spiritual health of the entire nation. If the people were faithful to God, the priests were provided for. Simple as that. The priesthood gave them stability, right? It was about teaching the law they already had from the past. But what about guidance for the here and now? What about the future? That brings us to the second part of God's solution, the promise of a prophet, a direct channel for God's living, breathing word.
And that's a great question, isn't it? If you've already got the established law and a whole priesthood to teach it, why do you need to add prophets into the mix? Well, the text actually flashes back to this huge moment in Israel's history, at Mount Sinai. When God spoke directly from the mountain, the people were absolutely terrified. They begged for a go-between, a mediator, someone who could talk to God for them. The prophet, then, is God's compassionate response to that very human request.
And here it is. This is the promise at the heart of the whole chapter. Moses declares that God will raise up a prophet like me. Now, this set up a continuous role, a whole succession of prophets who would be God's mouthpiece for generations. But, as we're going to see, it was also pointing forward to one final, ultimate prophet who would perfectly fill that role.
So naturally, a promise like that creates a huge practical problem. In a world full of voices, with lots of people claiming to speak for God, how on earth could you tell who was the real deal and who was a fake? Well, the text gives them a test.
And the primary test was actually pretty straightforward, very empirical.
It's like this. If a prophet makes a prediction in the Lord's name, does it actually happen? If the outcome doesn't match the prediction, the text says that prophet was just speaking on their own authority, and you don't have to be afraid of them. Now, of course, this had to be combined with other tests, like making sure their message never, ever contradicted the law God had already given.
So now we get to the real climax of this whole idea. That promise of a prophet like me came to be understood as having two layers of fulfillment, one for Israel's immediate history and another one that pointed to a final ultimate conclusion. This timeline kind of helps you see it. Moses set the standard. He was the original. Then, for centuries, you had a long line of historical prophets, guys like Samuel, Elijah, Isaiah, who were like echoes of that original promise. But for generations, people who read this text believed it was all building toward one final, perfect fulfillment, the ultimate prophet who would be perfectly like Moses. And early Christians, well, they identified that person as Jesus of Nazareth. And we really don't have to guess about that connection. In the New Testament, in the book of Acts, the Apostle Peter stands up in front of a crowd and quotes this exact verse from Deuteronomy. He directly applies it to Jesus, basically declaring, hey, remember that prophet Moses told us about all those centuries ago? He's here, and you have to listen to everything he tells you. So let's pull all these threads together. Why set up this whole system? Why have priests to preserve the past and a line of prophets to speak to the present? Why draw such a hard line against all that pagan magic? According to the text, it was all designed to grow one single quality within the people.
And that quality is captured in another key Hebrew word, tamim. It means to be complete, whole, or undivided. In this context, it's talking about a heart that has a pure and exclusive trust in God. It's the total opposite of hedging your bets, you know? It means not having one foot in faith and the other foot dabbling in trying to read the future or consulting other spiritual sources. It's an all-in commitment. And that, right there, brings the challenge of this ancient text hurtling right into our modern world. I mean, we might not be consulting mediums, but we are absolutely bombarded by endless competing voices and sources of information, all of them screaming for our trust. So the question Deuteronomy 18 leaves us with is a really powerful one. In our own lives today, what does it truly mean to have an undivided heart?